Hey everyone, welcome to the Bottom Shelf Horror Podcast, the podcast where a couple of cheap bastards talk horror over a couple of cheap drinks. Join us today as we take a deep look into Tetsuo the Iron Man, released in 1989. Fair warning, there will be spoilers throughout this episode, so if that's a concern for you, consider yourself warned.
Tetsuo starts with a man who has a metal fetish that is seen trying to insert a metal rod into his thigh. From there, the metal fetishist gets hit by a car and is presumed dead by a machine, the things that he seemingly fetishizes. The man driving a car, who we will call the salaried man from this point on, starts experiencing some crazy things, including changes to his body and other people's bodies as well. They are seemingly starting to have metal growths occurring all around their body. Concerned, he tries to hide his secret until he reaches a point where it becomes impossible to conceal his changes that his body is experiencing. Join us as we dive into a sensory overload of a movie and unpack everything that there is to offer from Tetsuo the Iron Man.
So yeah, we'll quickly jump in to give you a recap of Taste of Horror episode we released a few days back. Just telling you what drinks we have here in front of us and the drinks we made that were inspired by the movie. So do you want to start with your drink that you made?
Yes. As you can see in the martini glass here, it is a little silvery drink called the Metal Bullet. The Silver Bullet. Wow. I promise I haven't had too much, as you can see, even though martini glasses are a little bit deceiving. The Silver Bullet is lemon, dry gin, and I use Sambuca. 4 shots of dry gin, 2 shots of Sambuca, and a shot of lemon juice. But for the most part, the Sambuca was a little bit improvised because I think we were looking for something else.
Kumel liquor.
Kumel liquor. That's what we were looking for. And we couldn't find it, so we had to substitute that for Sambuca.
Yep, and it turned out pretty good as far as martinis go, I'd say.
Yeah. The color is exactly what we were trying to hit.
Yeah, it's sparkly, like a silvery color. Yeah. You can't really see it.
If you look at it in like a direct light, you can kind of see like the little sparkles in the glass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then my drink here, which both of us are more than half done, is, I call it the Ironsmith cocktail. It's vanilla milkshake, rum, triple sec, and just activated charcoal to make it that gray ironish color. And I mean, I named it the Ironsmith, and this movie is called Tetsuo the Iron Man. I couldn't call it the Iron Man cocktail because that already exists because of the Avengers.
Yeah.
Fucking Iron Man. So, Ironsmith it is, and yeah, I just tried to go for a solid gray color to try and depict iron.
Yeah, iron, or you could even say like the black and white movie.
Yeah, you could say that too if you want, but my intent was the metal.
Iron, yeah. No, that's completely fair.
And as far as which one I prefer, I mean, I think I prefer the Ironsmith one just because it's got like an orangey vanilla flavor. Not quite creamsicle, but pretty close. But yeah, I like that one. But also as far as martinis go, this is the favorite martini that I've ever had. I've had a few. I'm not super well versed in martinis, but I do like how this one tastes. It's very bold in flavor though. Yeah. So, and it's a sipper, I guess.
Yeah, and comparing the both of them, like, obviously orange creamsicles, so it's very obvious that I like that. I'm not the biggest fan of martinis myself. However, I'm going to say that this is the best martini I've had. Again, not a fan of martinis. For this, you definitely taste the Sambuca, I'd say, the most, followed by, like, that lemon
juice, yeah.
Is very welcomed. I'm pretty sure if it didn't have lemon, I'd absolutely hate it. I think the lemon just kind of cancels the flavors, especially of like the actual alcohol itself.
Yeah.
Of the gin especially. But it's nice.
But now that we got Taste the Horror review recap out of the way, let's quickly recap some of the drinking rules. Well, we'll recap all of them. We'll quickly go through them. Starting with death, of course, happened 2 times. We mentioned in our drinking game, it was just the woman on the bus with glasses and the girlfriend of the salaryman. I guess we can talk about how they died. The woman on the bus, she was just sitting there, I think she was reading or something, and the salaried man gets on the bus, sits next to her, she immediately stands up and goes to a seat to give them some space. Yeah. And then she sees some sort of like random chunk of metal with flesh on it, just sitting on the floor of the bus, and then she like pokes it with her pen, and then it attaches to her hand, and then kind of becomes a part of her body, and then it's presumed that the metal fetishist then kind of takes over her body, and she's kind of like a zombified puppet for him, and then she chases the salaried man around, and he eventually is able to hide away from her a little bit, and then he just stabs her in the throat, I think.
Yeah.
Either way, she dies from the salaried man, and that's her death.
So, continue.
Go ahead. No, go what you were saying.
So that death reminds me of, or like just the sequence of events, it really reminds me of Parasite the Maximum, which is an anime. And basically the premise is these parasites take over human bodies, and there's some people like the main character like has complete control of his body, even like, so he has to work alongside the parasite, whereas other parasites try to seek him out and kill him. So it kind of gives me the same vibes as that. Somebody who has control of their body, whereas somebody who lost control. And they're kind of like the same species trying to kill one another. So that's what it gives me the most similarities to.
Okay.
So it even does have some modern similarities if you want to compare it to things such as that.
Right.
Even though, like, to be fair, they're both in Japanese, so there could be some similarities there. It's up for debate, but that's what I see from my perspective anyways. Yeah,
fair enough. And then we got the girlfriend to the salaried man. Her death is basically she just decides to ride let's call it the dildo.
Yeah,
I think we came up with that name. It's a giant metal cock, which we'll get a little bit more into in a bit here. But yeah, she decides to ride the giant cock, and basically, I don't know if it was intentional or she just didn't think it would kill her, but yeah, she killed herself on that thing. So it was, I guess, out of the two deaths, I like that one the best. It was kind of just funny, and I don't know, it's just kind of a stupid death, really.
I'm not sure horrifying's the word for it. Almost like absurd, I feel is like a better word.
Oh, yeah. That point. Yeah, for sure. But do you want to go on to the next rule here?
Yeah, let's move on to the next rule. The other classic rule that we have for all horror movies: screams, cries, and yells. 15 sips for this movie.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to say on that rule, to be honest. It's a pretty standard rule. It's pretty prominent in this movie. I think it's kind of shadowed a little bit by the sounds and the sound design of this movie, maybe. The screaming is not the thing that stands out in this movie, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely.
But let's go on to rule number 3. It's whenever a new metal growth is shown, and it happened 14 times. I mean, it's kind of the main point of the movie.
Yeah. The main thing is like the stop animation. That's
the stop motion.
Yeah. A super cool sequence for it. Just noticing like expanding ways that his body changes. The main things are, I'd say, as a stop motion goes, I'd say a modern take on this would kind of, not even a modern, I think it was made a few years after The Fly. When was The Fly made?
I don't know.
Either way, it gives me The Fly vibes, so maybe one took a...
I think this was made after The Fly.
Was it made after? Okay.
Yeah, this was 1989. I think The Fly was 82 or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like that.
Actually, no, I know for sure this was made after The Fly, and we'll get to it.
Okay.
But yeah, this is, again, like we said in our drinking game, it's something when it's noticeably expanding, or you catch something new on his body or something different. You're not going to be able to count every individual piece of metal because it'd probably take you a month because you'd be pausing every frame and analyzing, okay, there's a new one, that's new, I haven't seen that, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's just whenever you catch it, we'll put it simply.
Some are a lot easier to catch than others. Sometimes it's
especially
just like...
in the beginning.
Oh yeah, especially in the beginning, because it just starts off small, then it starts to expand.
Yeah, exactly. It's exponential.
Yeah, it definitely hits that curve. Anyways, let's move on to rule number 4, which is whenever bodily harm is inflicted, which came to a total of 6 sips.
Yeah, again, not a lot to say. It gets pretty nasty at sometimes, like when the metal fetishist, right at the beginning, is inserting that metal rod right into his thigh, and then there's like maggots crawling around on it. It's it's pretty nasty to see sometimes, but it doesn't happen all that much. It's just kind of the body horror
element
of this movie, part of it at least.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on to rule number 5. We mentioned stop motion already, and that's actually one of the rules. Whenever stop motion scenes are seen, happens 17 times in the movie. Quite frequently it happens. So.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it was in some of the other rules, such as metal consuming.
Yep, that's
for the most
when
part.
it happens. Part of when it happens.
Yeah, it kind of adds the anxiety of the movie a little bit as well. So I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the chase scenes are the other main one.
Right. There's quite a few of those too.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really liked the animation style. It was definitely unique.
Oh yeah.
Especially for its time. The whole look of the movie was very unique.
Mm-hmm. And like you say, it just adds that anxiety. It's just kind of like, it's so fast paced as it's going. So it's like you're trying to sit there and pay attention to it all. And it's like chaotic. Everything's happening all at once and it's moving so fast. You're like, your heart starts beating. You're trying to keep up with it. It just adds to that anxiety, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to rule number 6, which is whenever water is seen, and a great example of this movie is sweat.
Mostly sweat. Sometimes there's a dripping faucet, or I don't know, I think there might be a hose or something with water coming out of it, but mostly sweat. And there's a lot of sweaty people in this movie.
There's a lot of sweaty boys.
And I think this is another aspect that makes you kind of feel uncomfortable, just because it's like seeing all this sweat when like something intense is happening in the movie. There's so much sweat involved in it. You're like, that would be so uncomfortable. So it just adds another layer of discomfort.
Think on a more deeper level, it makes me think of like kinetic energy and like how energy takes a lot to like transform and move. So especially when like machines are moving, like you expect like steam. Yeah. But the way that a human body steams is through sweat. So that's the vibes that I got for it, which I thought was super, I guess, unique. And I want to hope that they thought of that too.
Oh yeah, and it
when
makes
doing
sense.
the sweat. And I'll go on a limb and say that that's definitely their intent for sweat in the movie.
Yeah, because like you make a good point there. Because like the body changing into metal, you could only imagine how much like
energy it would produce.
And trauma that puts on the body. So your body's trying to fight it or like, cope with it. So like, sweating is
and like work it off, because I'd imagine it would be quite a workout to just go through all these like dramatic changes.
Exactly.
Such as like when somebody works out, their body's like physically going through changes. And how does it deal with it? Sweat is the main thing.
Exactly. Anyways, we'll go on to rule number 7. It's whenever somebody speaks. That's any dialogue. It happens 13 times in this movie.
Yeah. So to say the most, there's very little dialogue in this movie. And I mean very little. So much to this point where you can almost watch the entire film without subtitles.
Yep.
It's not really that important. I feel like it's a very visual movie.
Visual and auditory.
Oh, auditory as well, yeah.
Like, it doesn't need the dialogue, per se. Some scenes, like, sure, it adds an element, I guess, with the dialogue, but it's definitely not needed to enjoy this movie. Or, like, appreciate it, I guess. And, 13 times, like, it's a decent amount for, in sense of a rule, giving us drinks.
Yeah.
But in terms of how many times you hear somebody talk in a movie, it's not a lot at all.
Oh, definitely not. So let's go a little bit further into every time somebody speaks and how the I guess the dialogue itself isn't important in the movie. I feel like if this film was made in the 20s, it would be very groundbreaking.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because I feel like it's doable in the 20s with such instances such as stop motion. I feel like it would be possible and very doable with the type of media production that they had in the 20s.
Maybe, yeah. But the sound effects and stuff that they use, I don't know if that would necessarily be possible.
The metal clanging and things like that, I feel like it would be possible.
Maybe,
especially you show like the image and the text on screen. I feel like it would be a really unique concept to include in the 20s, and it really reminds me of like a 20s movie, such as like Nosferatu.
Fair enough, yeah. I think this movie is still, like, it's very well respected in the horror genre. It's kind of like a cult classic, really. It's not like a mainstream movie or anything, but it's still, like, respected, especially in the terms of getting the, like, cyberpunk movement. Like, it's ahead of its time in that sense, because cyberpunk wasn't popular back at the time of this movie, and it has those elements. Cyberpunk was around, but it wasn't popularized at the time, and Tsukamoto didn't know about Cyberpunk when he made this movie, so it was just a happy coincidence, I guess. But it was definitely, it helped further certain parts, especially in Japanese film.
I think more of like steampunk almost for...
Sorry, I meant steampunk, not cyberpunk.
I kind of figured. It's like, I can see the similarities you're making to steampunk. Yeah,
but I mean,
steampunk.
Steampunk, yeah. I mean, kind of cyberpunk in a way, too. Like, I mean, this is a sci-fi body horror, so I mean, there is that aspect. But yeah, no, I meant steampunk. But anyways, moving on to the 8th rule of this drinking game.
I'll take it away. Whenever you see a fan, and we like some fans in our movie drinking games, whenever we do it with our friends, this one came to a total of 8 sips.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a rule that we always have in place with our group of friends, and it's just an unwritten rule at this point. And it's because of what happened with one of our friends. We were watching Final Destination, and right in the beginning intro, there's like a million fans for some reason, and he started calling out, "Oh, another fan, take a sip. Another fan, take a sip." And it ended up being like every time we saw a fan in another movie, someone would call out, "Oh, there's a fan."
Yeah.
And I'd say it's about 50-50 on the horror movies that include fans.
I think Tucker and I are like, he thinks it's about 50. I think it's more than 50.
There's no way. I would even argue it's less than 50-50. Yeah. More movies don't have fans, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. No.
But we don't keep track.
We don't keep track, but like occasionally we call it out, and I feel like that's more often than not in most movies.
No way.
We look for fans a lot more than we do in for drinking rules in some of the movies we watch that aren't related to the channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this movie, like, it happened enough that it could be an actual rule for anybody because it has a lot of, like, industrial fans in the shops or the factories. Or, like,
exactly.
It happens, and everybody's sweating, so they need a fan blowing on them, right? So that's another aspect. So it's actually justified to include into this drinking game.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But rule number 9... it's whenever it cuts to lower quality footage, and it happens 9 times in this movie. And it's worth mentioning that this was for the director's cut, which is 77 minutes versus the original 66 minutes. So anytime it cuts to lower quality footage, know that that's part of the director's cut. And if you happen to watch the original cut, just don't include this rule. It's that simple, I guess. It's only 9 times, so it doesn't take that much.
You don't need to down a lot of glasses for a 66, 77 minute movie.
Yeah.
It's a lot. We'll get to that in a second. But generally, what is it? For the most part, it's just the man and the woman having sex in the woods. I guess. Well,
that's in the beginning.
You wanted to call him the most.
Salaryman.
Salaryman. Yeah.
And his girlfriend. They have sex in the woods right after supposedly murdering the metal fetishist in the street by hitting him with the car. Also, and they actually dump his body. Well, they try to dump his body, and while they're having sex, the salaryman is
recording, right?
Yeah, it's recording from the POV from the dead, the dead metal. Yeah, it's from his point of view, looking straight at them, and the salaryman is making eye contact with that dead body, and we'll get into the homosexual parts about this movie because there's quite a bit, that being one of them, and we'll get more deeper into that, but for now we'll leave it at that.
Also, I should add, what kind of a reaction is it to murder somebody, dump his body off in the woods, and then immediately have sex?
I've heard, like, actually when doing research for this, I came across a phenomenon of it's kind of I don't want to say common.
I have an add-on for this, but continue.
I don't want to say common, but it's a thing that happens when, after a traumatic experience or an accident, like a car accident, people, if they survive, they kind of get turned on, and it's a thing that happens.
It's like a rush.
Yeah, it's like maybe the adrenaline helps or something. I don't know how it works. I didn't look into the details, but I did read that it is pretty common for people to kind of get turned on by something tragic, I guess.
Huh.
And it's kind of, you wouldn't expect it, but it's just an, I guess, inexplicable phenomenon.
So it reminds me of the scene from You're Next, if you remember that. You know the exact scene I'm thinking of, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where I think her name's
Zoe?
Z.
Oh, Z. Yeah.
Z. talks to, what is it, like her boyfriend, forgot his name already, but she's like, fuck me next to your dead mother. That's the one thing I can think of.
And that's a similar, I guess, phenomenon as this. Same idea, I guess.
Yeah, like the rush of like killing your family, but and I can see how she gets a rush, but I don't think she considers like the full fact that he had to kill his mom. Anyways, let's move on to rule number 10. So that is whenever you see steam, which another common occurrence with this rule, with body sweating, not really. Anyways, 16 sips, common occurrence, and again, separate from water rule. One's liquid, one's gas.
Yeah, steam is just like boiled gas or whatever. Like, you could argue that
boiled water.
That's what I meant, sorry.
Yeah.
Turns into the gas. But you could argue that it's one and the same, but we counted it separately. So just keep that in mind when you're watching. Water is separate from steam. But all said and done, this movie gave us 115 sips, which was about equivalent to 4 standard 12-ounce cans. Keep in mind, this is a 77-minute film. The one we watched, at least, the director's cut, 66 minutes otherwise. So 115 sips, or 106 sips if you watch the original cut. It does come up pretty quickly on you.
Yeah.
Because it's a short movie, so you got to get through them fairly quick. But it's not a super difficult drinking game. It's like an average one, I'd say.
That's just because of how much less. I feel like once you get to 5 drinks, it's going to be a lot harder. So, for example, if it was like an average like 90-minute movie, you're going to be looking closer to like 140, 150 sips, which is going to probably suck a little bit more.
Yeah, it would happen. Like, you'd be having a whole nother drink with that, for sure.
Yeah.
But now that we've recapped the drinks we made, we recapped the drinking game we made, let's get into some stuff about the movie. Specifically, let's start off with the production of the movie. I think this is the main thing to talk about with this movie. So, to start we'll start off with Shinya Tsukamoto. So, he directed this movie. Everybody knows that. He wrote this movie. Okay, fair enough. He produced the movie. Okay, now you're getting a little crazy. He edited the movie. So, not only did he direct, write, produce, and edit, but he also started it as the metal fetishist. So he had like 5 different hats in this movie. Like, he was in charge of 5 different things. So it's, I guess, kudos to him for taking on so many roles because it's kind of impressive.
Yeah. Generally, when you see that a lot in film and media, especially for movies, the main things you think of is how badly it ends. So examples of that I can see are The Room was the main one, where Tommy Wiseau starred, edited, produced his own movie. And what was the other one that was on the top of my head?
Driller Killer?
Did he? Oh, that's right.
Abel Ferrara?
Driller Killer 2. I hated Driller Killer.
I think you hated it more than I did.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. Yeah.
And another, not on the same note, but another movies that do this is Creep, right?
Creep. And
that's a good one that turned out good.
I loved Creep.
Creep turned out better, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think, for me at least, this movie, I think, did a good job. Like, you don't even think about the metal fetishist as, like, you don't think that he's the director when you're watching this. It's just, he's a character in the movie. It is what it is. You don't even think about it, really. So, I think that it worked in this movie.
So, there was the other guy that I remember. I forgot his name, but he's also the guy that did, like, Double Down and Twisted Pair.
Okay.
Yeah. He's known for writing bad movies, but so, like, it's like The Room and the fact that they're so entertaining, they're bad. If we remember a name, we'll post it on the screen here, but that's about it. I forgot his name, and it bothers me a lot.
I won't be able to come up with it for you.
No, I'll come up with it in 15 minutes, probably, just thinking about it throughout the whole episode.
Okay. Well, if you say it, come back to it. But I guess fun fact about this movie, it was intended to be a 30-minute short film, and it was supposed to be based on the play that Tsukamoto wrote in college. Performed, and directed, I guess, in college. But as he was shooting it, it just kept getting expanded and expanded. So it ended up being basically a full-length film, almost like in between, to be honest. But, I mean, there's some shorter films that are hour and 10 minutes, hour and whatever. But, it was intended to be a 30-minute short film. Do you think that would have worked better in its favor, or do you think that it's a good choice that they did it full length?
So I'm gonna spoil this a little bit now.
That's fine.
Wasn't the biggest fan of this movie. And I feel like 30 minutes for kind of like to see like the growths and everything like that take effect, I feel like for myself it would have been a lot more effective. Yeah. That's just me personally though. I can see a lot of people disagreeing with me, and that is completely fine. In my perspective, I think 30 minutes would be great, but at the same time, hindsight is 20/20. So
right, yeah.
I feel like me saying that is not a set in stone thing, and it could be completely worse.
Well, we'll never know either.
And like that's the thing. I am not a filmmaker. I'm pretty sure Tsukamoto knows a lot more than I do.
Yeah.
So I'll go with his gut instinct.
Yeah,
and that's the
enough.
one thing that I have to think of with a lot of movies, such as like movies that we roast. Like I think a good example of that is Slender Man. We fucking hated. And well, like to be fair, they know a lot more about like script writing or anything like that than we do.
Do they?
Yeah.
Nobody liked that movie.
Oh yeah, no, I agree that a lot of things went wrong with that production. But
yes, they might know more than us. But
there's people out there that like the Slender Man movie.
I don't know. Maybe they're fucking 12 years old.
Yeah, who knows? They could be in our comments section. So, anyways. There's people that are out there for this job that went to school and everything like that.
Or didn't.
They could just be doing it from scratch. I know there is a lot of famous filmmakers that didn't go to film school or anything like that. But I'm not the expert. I'm going to say that.
Fair enough. But anyways, earlier on, you brought up The Fly. And I forgot that we were even going to talk about this. But Tsukamoto actually saw this film as a marriage between his favorite sci-fi films, Godzilla, The Fly, and Alien.
Oh.
So you can kind of see aspects from each one of the films. So Godzilla, I mean,
so the Fly was made before.
Yes, it was.
Okay, yeah.
Because it was one of his favorite sci-fi films.
Okay.
So Godzilla, I mean
to be fair, there's an earlier Fly.
We'll
assume it's the later
It is
Fly.
the original one.
Okay.
Or not the original one, sorry, it's the remake.
Yeah.
But Godzilla, the obvious connection, it's Japanese. You can kind of get the same vibes because it's set in Japan. Yeah, and then The Fly, obviously the body horror aspect. Just that alone is kind of the connection between the two. And then for Alien, his inspiration was specifically the xenomorph and its look. And he kind of tried to use that inspiration when he was doing like the metal fetishist and the metal growths and everything. He kind of went for that look a little bit. And who knows, maybe like everybody talks about the alien and the phallic representation that it has in that movie, and there's a lot of phallic references in this movie, so maybe that plays a part as well. We'll get into a few of those phallic scenes later on, but
so what I think of for Alien is just like the transformation of the alien as well, such as the transformation of like the Fly, you could say. What people don't really, I think, talk about enough is like the transformation of the alien, and especially since it comes out of the body, where they have these face huggers like on their face, like basically just pumping them full of like eggs pretty much, having them explode or turn to like fully blown xenomorphs. It's not really talked about as a as a body horror film, but I can see the aspect of that. So I think that's like super interesting. Like, so say Simple Cut, which is like the alien like being transformed in the body, and then like it all of a sudden evolves into a full blown xenomorph, aka Dildo. Yeah,
that's a good point. That like the Fly transformation and even the alien transformation, like you said, that's a big part about this movie as well. There's a big transformation happening, so that's another connection. That's a good point you point out there. But anyways, more about the production. Due to how particular Tsukamoto was with getting the proper shots for specifically this movie, it took about 4 months to shoot the film. And keep in mind, most of the not most, but a lot of the movie takes place in one apartment complex. Which the apartment complex was one of the crew members' house.
Okay.
So that apartment was just overtaken for 4 months where he's living. Not only that, but like that apartment where you see it is totally trashed. There's like metal all over, there's garbage all over, the walls are destroyed, all that. They had to actually trash the apartment for this movie to work. So one scene in particular that I think of is when he has the dildo, he sticks it through the door, and there's a big hole in the door. They actually had to drill out that hole and wreck his door to do this. So, like, his actual apartment that he was renting was getting destroyed for the sake of this movie. And that was over 4 months. So, like, 4 months doesn't seem like a long time, whatever. But keep in mind, it's somebody's apartment that they're living in. It's getting destroyed. And, yeah, it's just a interesting piece, I guess.
Yeah. And so, like, what I think about when you tell that story is I think about, apartments are generally, like, month to month or, like, annually, right? Like, you sign a lease.
Sometimes, yeah.
So, like, for example, like
6 months sometimes.
And, like, so for example, like, our setup right now is in your house. Like, we're taking up a very small part of your basement.
Yeah.
We are not taking up your bedroom. We are not taking up your living room.
The whole main floor or anything.
Yeah. We're taking up, like, a very small portion. I'd say this is maybe like a tenth of the house.
Yeah, I was gonna say an eighth.
An eighth, yeah. Like a very small amount.
Yeah.
So in comparison...
It's a bedroom.
Yeah, in comparison, this is a very large portion. Like apartments are like, what? 2-3 rooms.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky...
That looked like a pretty small apartment.
Yeah.
It could have been just a one-bedroom, to be honest.
If you're lucky, it's a 3-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
Or 2-bedroom. It's probably a 2-bedroom apartment.
It's probably a 1-bedroom, honestly.
Okay, we're going down.
I honestly think so.
Okay, it's a 0-bedroom apartment.
It's a basement suite. Okay. No, I think it is 1 bedroom because of how small it is. I could be wrong, but
yeah.
It's hard to tell in the fucking chaos of that apartment.
In the shot. But anyways, like, so imagine, like, having to, like, take everything down so you can sleep properly or leave everything up and sleep uncomfortably and basically live where you sleep. And
live where you work, you mean?
Yeah, sorry. Sleep where you work.
There we go.
Yeah. You have to sleep where you work, and that would be fucking miserable.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be
especially
fun.
for 4 months. So,
4
for
months.
example, like, have you ever gone to the place... So there was a few studies where it's just, like, if you study in your bedroom or, like, on your bed, you'll be less likely to sleep.
You study?
Yeah. So, like, for example, like...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's why you try to separate, like, work from play and, like, study somewhere else, is because you'll kind of, like, bring it home with you. I'm not sure, like, what test results show for, like, actual, like, if your grades improve or anything like that. But it shows, like, a lack of sleep. So, like, for example, I'm the kind of person that, like, occasionally when I like to sleep, I, like, play a mobile game. And sometimes when I play too much, like, if I play, like, chess too often, I think about, like, chess moves in my head or, like, strategic things, and it keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
So, like, my brain's still constantly ticking for, like, another, like, hour. And generally, I'm the person that falls asleep immediately if I'm not doing that.
Right. Yeah.
So I could only imagine if that happens all the time, where they're having dreams about Tetsuo the Iron Man, and it's just miserable for 4 months.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't imagine, and I feel so bad for that person. So bad.
I don't remember who it was that was like what crew member it was.
And especially if it was somebody like the woman, that would be brutal.
It wasn't the woman for sure.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think it was any of the actors in the movie. I think it was one of the crew members. Maybe it was the filmer.
Yeah.
There wasn't many.
It was somebody, there
wasn't many crew members. Like, they had next to nothing budget, but there was.
And I could and then I just thought of this. I can only imagine, like, the afterwards thing is, like, they come home, it's just some guys like, oh yeah, no, that film that they were working on for 4 months in our apartment is finally taking place, and the place has just been trashed. Like, they lost their deposit because they drilled a fucking hole through their door.
On top of other things.
On top of multiple other things. They drilled a hole through their door.
Yeah.
And they're always like, okay, finally we can see the premiere of this fucking movie you've been working on. And then you go to the premiere and you see this guy fucking killing a girl with his drill dough on the bed, like, in the middle of the living room or wherever, and, like, the first thing that probably pops through her head is, like, he did all this for 4 months and I want a divorce. Like, I don't know if I could handle that. Like, it's a lot to go through.
Well, you gotta have a passion for the project for sure in order to go through that.
Oh yeah, no, it was made with love. And with the drill dough, maybe too much love.
Anyways, moving on. Like, 4 months for shooting the film, and then overall it took 18 months because, like we mentioned at the top, Tsukamoto was the one directing, producing, writing, and editing. So he was the one doing all the editing in the end after it was shot. And he was only doing it on a $17,000 budget, which is nothing. And it was all out of pocket for him.
Yep.
So, $17,000 budget, all out of pocket. We couldn't find how much money this movie actually made. But I think because it was $17,000, I think that might be why he chose to shoot it in black and white. Because at this time it was much cheaper to shoot in black and white, and also it kind of covers up any imperfections.
Yeah.
For example, like Psycho. They shot it in black and white by a choice, and they used, what was it, syrup for blood or something? They didn't use, they didn't try to make it look like real blood because it's black and white, right?
Yeah.
So they could use some thick, viscous syrup or something to make it thick like blood. And so it kind of covers up imperfections like that. And I think that's why they did it for this movie as well.
Yeah.
Because it kind of makes it more effective in a production standpoint and in terms of how much it costs, I guess. Yeah. So I guess in saying that, we don't, like we mentioned, we don't know how much the film actually made. And at first it didn't have a whole lot of eyes on it. But it eventually got shown at the Fanta Festival in Rome in 1989, so same year that it was actually released. But it was screened there without subtitles.
Without subtitles.
Because Tsukamoto couldn't afford to have it translated. What? Because of his budget.
What?
Yeah.
Like somebody to basically watch a movie for an hour and basically say this means this.
He couldn't
afford somebody.
No.
Because so I'm just trying to think. There was probably animes, for example, that were popular in 1989 and getting fucking translated. This is Dragon Ball was probably released in early 90s.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's surprising. I mean, how is the budget that poor?
$17,000.
Yeah.
That's how much he had.
Oh my god.
And think about it. You got to pay your actors. You got to pay for all the props, and you got to pay for everybody's time. $17,000 doesn't go anywhere when making a movie. A movie that comes to mind is Terrifier 2. They had a $250,000 budget. They made millions, but $250,000 sure sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not when it comes to a movie. You can't make a cheap movie for $1 million. I think they call indie films $1 million or less now. So indie film is...
Paranormal Activity?
It can go up to $1 million. Paranormal Activity used a lot less budget.
Yeah.
But, they classify any, movies that are under $1 million budget. I think that's the standard for indie films. So that's quite a bit of money to work with, but it goes very quickly when making a movie.
Yeah.
So $17,000, you might as well have $0 with that amount.
Okay.
So I don't know how much it would have costed at the time to translate for subtitles. For us, it'd be simple, just go on Google at this point. But they didn't have that option back then.
But I still feel like that would be dirt cheap at that point. All you need is just somebody that knows English and Japanese.
You need a friend that knows both, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, a friend that knows. I still feel like you can just go to a college and find somebody who's taking an English major.
You probably could have.
At that point, I'm just I'm super surprised that he couldn't spend $200 to make somebody watch his movie.
Well, yeah, they still screened it, and due to its thing.
And that's the other thing I was gonna say. How I was saying, this could have been a silent film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but silent film that still has, this movie couldn't make it without the sound.
Oh yeah,
the sound effects.
And that's the thing. They had the sound effects. That's the thing that I love about music is it's universal.
But this isn't music even.
Yeah, but
there is
sound effects. It's universal.
Silent films are typically just music playing over top of the video. This isn't they don't have much sound effects, do they? In silent film, I haven't seen much silent film.
They have a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, they generally have a soundtrack, and then the text placed on the screen afterwards. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's for the dialogue and stuff if they have any.
Yeah.
But this movie, the sound is a big part about it.
Yeah.
And anyways, after the fact that it got screened at this Fanta Fest, it had a positive reception, and it ended up getting a limited theatrical release in Japan, was successful there, and then ended up with a theatrical release in United States as well. And at this point, it did have subtitles. like, because it was successful from the Fanta Fest. It made a little bit of money and then had a release in Japan and then had a little bit more money from that and then got money enough success to go into the United States with subtitles.
Yeah. And
it is, like, reported, even though it was a limited release, that the theaters were packed each night that it was shown. It's kind of this, again, we brought up Terrifier 2. It's the same idea as that. That had a limited release, and it's been packed in theaters pretty much every night that it was released.
Yeah.
And I don't know what this movie was rated at the time. I feel like it probably wasn't rated, which is one aspect as to why it would be a limited release. Similar to Terrifier 2, I think, because a lot of theaters just can't show a movie that's not rated. But even after the theatrical run, it was then released on VHS, and again, you would have made more money from that. And you would assume, like we mentioned, we don't know how much it made, but with a $17,000 budget, you would assume that this movie was profitable in the end.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what made it into a cult classic, I guess.
So I'll add a little bit to that. So what I really think about for a lot of that is what Japanese horror films come to mind when I say the word J-horror.
What comes to mind for me?
What comes to mind for you?
I mean, first is Gojira, I guess. Fuck, you're putting me on the spot here.
Yeah.
Or I mean, this movie, if we weren't talking about it, would be the first one to come up in mind for me. What else?
So, like, the main things that I think of are, there's three, one that you might not have heard of, but generally, like, The Ring, The Grudge.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And then, I'm not sure if you heard of Perfect Blue.
No.
Amazing movie.
Okay.
But that's in full animation.
Ringu and
Ju-on, sorry. But yeah. Perfect Blue is a very phenomenal, like, horror anime movie.
Okay.
And it basically, I think it's one of my favorite movies in the 90s.
Okay.
But anyways, I'd say that Japanese horror, like, it's basically been monster movies. And monster movies, some people wouldn't even classify it as horror in that sense. Because, so, like, it's video games in, like, the 1970s, 1980s, where it's just, like, oh, it's just, like, a shooter game. Like, you just, like, as a side-scroller shooter, there's not much horror. Or, like, Castlevania, for instance. Like, there's no jump scares. There's no, like, true horror-defining elements, such as, like, Silent Hills we have nowadays, where this is, like, full-body horror. So people are just like, oh, my goodness, what is this? It basically released a modern take for that full audience, so I can see exactly why the theaters were packed. It's in their language, and, like, nobody's ever, like, thought of, like, or had that experience in comparison to, like, they probably had things like Rosemary's Baby or Exorcist, but nothing in their language to experience that, like, fully with, unless they had, I don't know if they have, like...
They might have had something.
Or anything like that.
Well, they might have even had other movies. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm not well-versed in foreign horror.
I'm not sure how, like, horror translates from, like, America to, like, other countries, such as Japan.
Yeah.
And if they were to say, like, oh, this is a great movie from this country, so you have to, like, view it with subtitles all the time. Because, obviously, like, America's, like, basically pumps out movies every so often, and if they see it with dub subs, I'm not sure how that works. But the fact that they get to see a body horror movie in their own time, that's, I would say, very, what's the word for it? Very, like, I'd say groundbreaking for a modern audience. With a Japanese audience, I feel like I could see 100% why it's packed. It's basically they're breaking ground, and that's the way that, like, anime is. I know that anime budgets are very minimal, and, like, a lot of animators get paid absolute garbage.
Yeah.
But I could definitely imagine how this would, like, stick with a lot of movie audiences, and I know
and it would spread a lot through word of mouth.
Oh yeah, and that's the other thing, such as, like, Halloween, for instance. But yeah, no, the budget, I'd say, would definitely get surpassed. He'd definitely make his money's worth. For the main fact that it's, like, streaming on places like Shudder, so they have to probably pay them rights for the movie.
Oh, at this point, he's made
at this point,
a lot of money off it.
At this point, he's made a lot of money. And I hope to God
that
the person who gave up his apartment for 4 fucking months is getting paid a lot of money is the main point I'm trying to make.
But, yeah, anyways, there was actually a point where Tsukamoto was about to scrap the idea and just burn the film reels.
What?
Yeah, because like they had already recorded a bunch of it and he was about to burn it. And a lot of that had to do with his father, who basically always told him that he was a failure. Said like, because at this point he'd made it, I think it was 2 movies before this movie, and they both kind of failed. They didn't do a whole lot. Again, they were low budget, didn't have any success. But he ultimately stuck with the project to kind of prove his worth to his father, and kind of like at this point he was all in on this project, so he couldn't afford to scrap it. So it's either like waste all this money and time and burn all this shit, or finish it and see what happens. So he eventually ended up finishing it. He was kicked out of his parents' house because they were sick of having him there, and like with in Japanese society especially, like the parents are very hard on
very
kids.
hard, yeah. Especially in like a lot of Asian cultures where it's just like high grades are everything. And like by what we mean high grades is like 90s are unacceptable.
If you don't get an A, you're doing bad.
Yeah, and like the way that it works in Japanese culture is like for example in university I would get D's if I was in like any Asian sort of culture. But D's is very, very modest in Canadian culture, for instance.
I mean, D's, I would say C's modest.
No. So, like, D's in, like, basically it's like 80s. 80s, 70s is good.
Yes,
in university.
Yes. Yeah.
But, like, in Japanese culture, that's, like, shunned upon. Like, you're getting 70s, garbage.
They disown you, kind of.
Yeah.
That's pretty common. I think it's getting less like that nowadays with more, like, just the way society is changing and progressing. I think it's getting less like that. At least that's what I've heard. I don't know.
I think it's depending on the cultures for the most part.
Well, obviously there's going to be people that are still like that too. In general, like they still are they have a very high expectation, and if their kids aren't going to be, doctors or lawyers or something like that, if it's anything creative, I'll say they're kind of like. It's not every parent either. But a lot of them are like they're shunned. Their kids are shunned until they end up making a bunch of money,
dollars,
and that's when
their parents wrong.
And that's when the parents are like, "Oh, okay, it makes sense now."
Yeah, and that's the one thing I hate about the culture is just like they try to pursue their dreams, and their parents disapprove, and their parents are just like, "Oh, you make millions of dollars. Welcome to the family again."
Finally, doing something right. Yeah.
I hate that motivation.
Oh yeah,
it's just like. I wouldn't care if I had like a deadbeat son, but I'd love to have a deadbeat son that does what they love.
Yeah, I mean, I'd prefer not to have a deadbeat, but
I mean, I want somebody that's happy because they're doing what they want.
Yes,
yeah,
of course. But, anyways, enough about Tsukamoto and his path, I guess, with the movie. Talk about, I guess, the way that this movie. We mentioned it already about how anxiety-inducing it is, or sensory overload this movie is. And I've never had an anxiety attack myself. I don't know if you have.
I've had minor ones, but like nothing really to... Like, the way that I manage anxiety is very calming. It's just like, I know I'm having an anxiety attack, so I just like focus on like something that like interests me, and like I breathe in, breathe out, and then just like focus on like myself. Especially at work, it happens like.
Oh yeah.
You
kind of catch it before it gets full force.
And like that's the thing. Like people have like breakdowns and everything like that. Like I'm very in control of my emotions. So,
and that's kind of the same with me. Like I can, I guess, control it and I guess keep it bottled in sometimes to a fault. Until I can't anymore. But I won't let it out at the wrong place at the wrong time kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I can bottle up until I know when to let it out. And that's the main thing.
That's just it. You need to know when to release it.
Yeah.
But, I think, like, when watching this film, in my mind, I feel like this film could easily trigger an anxiety attack.
So the main thing about anxiety attacks is there's been so many times where like I'm watching with my fiance, for instance, when she just wants to turn off a movie, and I completely get it. It's just like a scene where like a dog's getting like microwave, like that's an absurd example, but a dog's getting microwaved. It's like, I want to turn this off. This makes me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I like that's a lot of the things that horror induce, especially since I'm the type of person that gets desensitized by like modern horror. How jump scares don't really keep me up at night or anything like that.
Oh yeah, and that's the same with me. And like I said, I've never had an anxiety attack, but I feel like this movie is the thing that closely, it almost makes me feel it, I guess.
Yeah, and like that's the main reason. Almost one of the main reasons why I don't like the movie is just because it makes me so uncomfortable.
That's part of why I like it.
Yeah, and like that's part of the appeal, and I 100% understand that.
And I think some of the ways they do this is through the stop motion, like we talked about. Like they're so fast paced. You're trying to remain focused on what's going on while it's so fast paced and moving so sporadically, because clearly it's unnatural when shit's like stop motion, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to keep focused on. So you're trying to focus on that. You're trying to keep your brain on what's going on, and it just seems like it's so exhausting.
It's an exhausting movie. And it's 66 minutes, 77 minutes.
Yes.
And it's exhausting to get through, which is unbelievable.
And I think you got to be in the right mood and kind of know what you're getting into to watch this movie.
So I remember, like, you gave me a download for the movie because I had no way to reach it. And then, like, literally two weeks later, it was released on Shudder. So anyways, I watched the movie, and then... I was downloading it, and then I was like, Shelby, do you want to watch this movie with me, Tetsuo the Iron Man? And she's like, no. And I'm like, why do you not want to watch this movie with you? It's like, because I saw how it was downloading, and like the way that it downloads is it immediately plays the movie, and there was just a girl getting fucked with a drill dough, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, no, I looked over, I saw that, I'm like, yeah, that's a fair argument, okay, I respect that. And yeah, she's the one that has a lot of anxiety, and I understand how that would make somebody feel very uncomfortable seeing that scene and not wanting to watch the movie at all.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I feel like that's the same way that people are desensitized. Like they know like all the body horror that's like I wouldn't say like body horror, but like the way that people are mutilated in common horror, such as like Terrifier 2, for instance. Mm-hmm. And how that takes an effect on people, but people are so, like, accepting of it almost, and, like, they're like, oh, man, this is what can happen to a human body, so they just kind of accept it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's not, like...
Or, like, in comparison, like, they don't think of things that are, like, unnatural, such as the fly.
Yeah.
Or as Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even just the components or, like, what you're seeing. It's not even, like, the aspects of the movie. It's the way that it's shot and the way the stop motion is used and just the way that it looks. Everything's so fast-paced and chaotic, and there's metal growths happening here and there. And I think one of the biggest thing that makes you feel it is the sound design. I think that's I would argue the major culprit to making you feel anxious.
And that's the weird thing. I love the sound design. That was one of my favorite parts of the movie.
It couldn't work without it, I don't think.
Oh, definitely not.
But like, one example, right in the beginning, before he sticks the metal rod into his thigh, you see him grinding the pole against his teeth, and you just like cringe, and in the best way possible, I think. But like it shows the grinding with the teeth and the metal pole.
Especially like when you can just like imagine the rust.
You know what that would feel like.
Yeah,
like, you can imagine it.
Like if you can like visualize it right now, just like imagine like somebody having like
a piece of rebar,
and like stringing it across your teeth. You can imagine that right now, and you just have goosebumps instantly.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And, like, the sound paired with the visual chaos, I'll say.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, man, I do not want to watch this movie. And then he shoves it in his thigh, and it's like,
yeah, and then there's maggots, and, it just escalates and escalates. But without the sound, I don't think this movie works on the level that it does.
Yeah.
But let's move away from the production. We've talked about it quite a bit. Mm-hmm. We talked about Tsukamoto a lot. We talked about how this makes us anxious, I guess. Let's go on to some specifics, a little bit about the movie. So we'll start with the metal fetishist as a character, played by Shinya Tsukamoto.
Okay.
He's the guy, right at the beginning, we see him putting the rod in his thigh, which you mentioned, and then he sees the maggots crawling around like it's infected, and he freaks out and goes out running around trying to look for help or something. Yeah. And then he gets hit by the car. Mm-hmm. Before we go into like any further about him, I want to talk about the scene where he's putting the rod into his leg. While he's doing that, we can see several pictures, I guess, of professional athletes, all from America.
Okay.
And I think they're mainly basketball players. I could be wrong about that, but I think like one of them might be Michael Jordan, for example. Mm-hmm. I could be mistaken on that. I don't know. But a lot of them are basketball players.
We're football watchers here, not basketball. Yeah.
But anyways, when I see that, like I see him putting the metal rod in his leg, and I see the pictures of the basketball professionals behind him, or professional athletes in general. I don't know for sure if it was all basketball. But I think that it was kind of representing the fact that he wanted to be physically stronger, almost indestructible, by putting the metal into him and making him have metal body parts, so that he could kind of become one of these professional athletes that he idolizes, maybe because in his mind, if I put iron, like I'll have an iron femur, that makes my legs indestructible. I can't break any bones. It'll make me stronger. I can jump higher. I kind of think that's what he is thinking.
Yeah.
Because he clearly idolizes these athletes that he's got pictures of.
And that's kind of the same like vibe I got from it. It's like, how do I get stronger with iron? Blanking. But yeah, no, so anyways, I kind of feel like he wants to be like an indestructible human being. And he's like, how can I be indestructible? Is by being the best human I can possible, inserting iron into him, being basically an Iron Man. And because like, obviously you think of comics at that time, Iron Man. So like and like the main thing is like when they say the word Iron Man is especially in like sports, is like the person that doesn't go down, the person that can play every game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Like you don't have an injury, you're indestructible. Like so for example, there's Iron Man awards where it's just like people that never have injuries but always play every game.
Stuck it through and like
like it doesn't matter anything, but they don't miss games pretty much.
Exactly.
So like in saying that they're like, no, I don't want to say the word immortal, but like the person that like nothing can stop them.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what is going through his brain. Like, I want to be like them. They can't be stopped. They're clearly on another plane. They're
the peak. The
physical performance.
Yeah, the peak physical performance. Yeah. That's a good way of saying it.
And I think that's what he kind of longs for when we're seeing this scene. But anyways, we see him. So throughout the movie, there's like this TV in the apartment where the movie was shot. There's a TV that shows random things, and they're actually memories, mostly from the metal fetishist. And at one point, we see a memory of a doctor talking, and he's telling him that he's got chunks of metal in his brain, and that was from the accident where he got hit by the car, going back into that. And I, like, this is a sci-fi body horror, right? So, like, it's not totally explained, but eventually we find out that he can sort of control metal. He's, I guess, a metal bender, if you will. So if somebody comes in contact with metal, he can basically make the metal one with that person and then control their body through said metal.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not really explained, like I said, but for the sake of the movie, it kind of just needs to be accepted. And we first see him take control of the woman on the bus, like we talked about how she died. She sees the chunk of metal on the bus, she pokes it with a pen, and then the metal takes over her hand, and then the metal fetishist takes control of her. Yeah. That's kind of his main role in the end, is he can control metal, and that's how he kind of eventually consumes the salaryman with said metal. But we see throughout the movie his vision of a new world, and we see it, I don't know if it's spray painted or what, but we see it like pan across. It says new world, and we see it sprinkled throughout the film. Yeah. And I think this is the main commentary on society and humanity as a whole that Tsukamoto was going for, and it's, in short, our reliance on technology. So it comments on how technology can be a danger to us, but not only that, like how it can take over, basically, like machines and technology can take over, and it's inevitable for humanity. That's kind of the point he's trying to get across. Yeah. We may not be totally wiped out by it, but we will be so much consumed by it that we're essentially just sentient beings being controlled by these machines. And I think is saying that that's the eventual path that humanity will take, and basically a transhumanist society where it's like it's humans that go beyond human capabilities, and it's like technology and machines kind of are the primary rulers, I guess.
Yeah. So I have a very recent example of this. So at my work today, the power went out. Yep. And how do you think that went?
Yeah.
All the debit machines, all the credit machines crashed, and the only thing that people could take was cash. So how do you think people expected to pay for their bills?
Yeah.
It was cash.
Yeah, which 90% of people don't carry.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's either people had to leave the store or people had to pay with specifically cash. And, yeah, so it is to say how technology basically runs the world.
We rely on it too heavily.
Yeah, there was a fucking... Sorry, side topic here. There was a crazy lady who wanted gift cards for her company, but paid the whole thing in fucking cash. And it was $15,000.
Oh, no.
Paid $15,000 in like
Today?
50s. No, it wasn't today.
Oh, okay.
Like, because of the holidays,
Oh,
$15,000 in cash transactions in a day, in a single transaction.
For one person.
Yeah. Oh, God. That company for sure has some grand larceny. Don't know the company or anything like that. But, yeah, that company's doing something illegal probably. I can't prove it though. I can't
It was probably non-taxable bonus.
I wasn't there, but I just saw the transaction. It was like three different transactions of gift cards that were like a total of like $15,000, and it was all paid in cash. Fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Who does that nowadays? Nobody.
Who does that ever?
Nobody. Nobody. That's just sketchy as shit.
Anyways, I guess one example in this movie, specifically going back on track here, is like the example of the transhumanist commentary, I guess. One example is his injuries. He gets an injury. For example, he cuts himself shaving, let's say. The salaryman, that is. He cuts himself shaving, and then there's a little piece of metal growing out of it. And his wounds, that's kind of what happens. His wounds are all healing from metal rather than flesh. The metal is healing his wounds. So that's just like one, I guess, piece of this that, again, commentates on how technologies and machines in general are kind of taking over society. Yeah. And that's the main message of this movie. There's a couple other ones we'll get to, but that's the kind of main things that he's commentating on, I guess. But let's move away from the metal fetishist and all of his stuff, and move on to the salaryman. I think everywhere you look, this character is described as the salaryman or businessman. Kind of depends where you look and which sources you look at. And I think it's for a good reason. We mentioned the society in Japan, how it's very, like the parents have very high expectations of their kids. Another thing about the culture of Japan is you're kind of expected to put your role in society and your career above your family, your friends, and even yourself. You're expected to put your contributions to society first. So that society is functioning at a high level, and then you worry about yourself after that. So it's very common. The salaryman in Japan is, I think, something that he was commentating on again. Not just the transhumanist message, but also how everyone in Japan is just supposed to focus on your job, and put your own mental health, it takes a backseat, along with your friends and family as well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that was 100% his intention to get that message across, but I think, I certainly felt that when watching this salaryman, you can clearly see how stressed out he is every time you see him. Before the metal even gets played a part in it. You see him on the bus, and even he gets these crazy daydreams, and he's clearly longing for, I think, human connection.
Yeah.
So, like, both mentally and clearly physically, as the movie progresses, he's having all these stresses. But I think the mental starts out because of his job. So he's expected to, contribute to society, like I say. But while he's at home, he has these dreams. A lot of them are daydreams while he's still awake. Sometimes they're nightmares when he's sleeping and then he wakes up. But it usually involves other humans. A lot of them involve his girlfriend, especially in the beginning, because I think he's longing for the human connection like I talk about, because he doesn't get it because he's just too busy working all the time, trying to contribute his role in society. But he's longing for human connection. And we see him dreaming of sex with his girlfriend sometimes. And like, it kind of just goes to show the mental stress that he's going through as well. And I think that's another message in this film. Like I said, he kind of just longs for that human connection. Even though he does have a girlfriend, it's not satisfying him because he has no time to spend with her.
That's what I was thinking too, right?
And I think that's another little message that he goes... That Tsukamoto, I don't know, again, if it's intentional or if it's just kind of a side message or what, but that's kind of a thought that I think when I'm watching this movie, for sure.
Yeah, especially when you have his significant other and, like, obviously, like, salary man, his main focus is his job, so he doesn't think of, like, his family or anything like that. He thinks of what he'd rather be doing, and that is spending time with his significant other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like what he desires, but he can't go and fulfill those desires because of his job.
Exactly. And then, like, once he turns into the Iron Man, indestructible, can do what he wants, and then Drildo takes effect.
Yeah, and speaking of Drildo, it kind of leads to another component of this movie, is the homosexual displays going on. So, like, there's a lot of phallic representation, and not just that, but the homosexual displays going on. So, like, a little bit of some examples is, like we mentioned at the beginning, when he hits the guy with his car, and then he has sex with his girlfriend, but while he's having sex with his girlfriend, he's making eye contact with the supposed dead body of the guy he hit.
Yeah.
And so he's like...
He's like literally looking at another man.
To, like, specifically directly looking at the other man and, like, still getting off on it.
And, like, so here's the thing. Like, especially in, like, the 80s.
89.
Like, yeah. So, like, there was a lot of, like, homosexual, like, nuances in films. So, like, one example is, like, the original Top Gun is what nobody really talks about. Is, like, the homosexual experience in that between him and his partner.
Right. And
how losing him. And I'm not sure if you've seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where that whole scene is basically trying to, like... It's basically shirtless men in the homosexual experience and trying to... What is it? Like, he basically... So, one scene in that movie, for instance, is the main character doesn't want to have sex with his girlfriend, so instead he invites this guy who's, like, his friend to sleep in a room with him instead. So, like, it was a big thing in, like, the late 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think even with this movie, like, it was I don't want to say ahead of its time, because obviously a lot of movies were having the homosexual, the gay message.
But it was ahead of its time, I think, for sure.
Kind of, in
but
a
not
way.
Not in that way. Not in that way.
Well, especially in Japan, too. I don't think they talk about
in its
sexuality.
Culture, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Like, they didn't... I don't know for sure, but I kind of suspect that this was not a topic of conversation. You don't talk about if you're gay or whatever. If you are, whatever, it's probably taboo, but you don't talk about it, right? Yeah. And I think...
Depending on cultures, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in Japan specifically, where this movie was made, and I guess probably made for that audience at the time.
Yeah, especially, like, a lot of Japanese culture depends on, like breeding is like, are you going to bring me grandchildren, all that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like, how are you going to produce so that we have grandchildren that our legacy lives on?
Yeah, exactly. So, on top of the scene where he's having sex with his girlfriend, he's making eye contact with the guy while he's, finishing up. But you could argue that away. Maybe it's not gay. Maybe he's just nervous that he just killed someone who's staring at the body because of it.
Yeah.
Sure, you can play it off like that. But then you see a scene where the salaryman is daydreaming again, like we talked about. He's daydreaming about sex with his girlfriend, but she has a long metal wire, cable, I don't know what you call it, connected to her groin area, and it's kind of just like waving around in the air, and he's bent over on all fours with his ass out as if he's going to take the cable up his ass, and it's almost like he's having a fantasy about it, as if he wants to get fucking, like, he wants to get pegged by his girlfriend. Again, maybe another homosexual sexual fantasy. But eventually he then does take it up the ass and he wakes up from the dream.
Yeah. I mean, you could also play that off as, like, in a sense, as, like, you're going to get fucked by the media. And it's, like, not the media, but, like, technology in a sense. Where, like, technology is going to control you. Technology is going to make you the submissive.
Yeah.
Where technology is going to be dominant in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Fair enough. But then, again, going back to the phallic references, we had the phallic cable already, like we just talked about. But then we had the metal drill dick, the dildo. It's not so much a homosexual display, rather than just a giant metal dick.
Yeah,
but
take it as you'd like.
It's certainly in your face. The salaryman is ashamed of it at first.
Take it as it's in your face.
It's in your face.
It's in your face. The metal dildo is in your face.
But at first he's trying to hide, and I mean, obviously you can't hide that shit. It's a giant metal cock that's spinning. Mm-hmm. But so he first tries to hide it, then eventually, like, whatever, he gives up, and then he starts trying to have sex with his girlfriend. But she clearly doesn't want it, and she stabs him in the neck, mm-hmm. and he passes out. At this point, he's presumably dead.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the metal that heals him or what. It's not really explained. If maybe he didn't actually die, but he wakes up again. He wakes up. The first thing he sees when he wakes up and regains consciousness is his girlfriend sitting on his dildo, dead. There's blood splattered on the curtain or whatever behind them, and she's trying to ride his cock.
Yeah, and that could be also explained from the whole experience of with near death, or I guess the whole experiences with near death experiences where it makes you aroused, right?
Right. Yeah. True.
Yeah.
That's true.
So you think of that, and then you think of oh man, I'm still so hot and bothered by this near-death experience, and then your reaction is to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, she probably didn't want to live with this freak who couldn't satisfy her anymore.
It's a lot.
She probably was just
to take in.
No
pun intended, by the way. It's no pun intended.
She's probably just thinking I'm just gonna have one last hurrah. And it is what it is. Probably won't feel great, but it is what it is, like I said. But another scene that you think of when talking about the homosexual desires that the salaryman may have, or just in general in the movie that it talks about, is near the end when the metal fetishist and the salaryman combine into one giant heaping pile of metal. Mm-hmm. So there's a series of scenes and visuals that play out that kind of imply that they have sexual desires for one another. Like they're
combining each other, right?
Well, that's part of it, yeah. But even while they're doing that, it kind of cuts into this, I don't know, it's a fantasy world or what, but they're kind of embracing each other, they're holding each other, and they're both just it almost like they desire one another. And then when it cuts to them in their final form, where they're just a giant pile of metal, the salaryman, all you see is his face. Mm-hmm. The fetishist is up in the top. He still has his arms. He's holding a gun or whatever. But the salaryman, all you get to see is his face, and he's down at the crotch level. So he's basically his head and face are right where the metal fetishist penis would be. Mm-hmm. So that's another maybe symbolic thing about how there may be some,
untapped desires.
Yeah,
I guess.
There might be some of those sexuality commentary on this, I guess. And I may have missed some other scenes, but those are the ones that come to mind when talking about the sexuality aspect and like the homosexual desires. But I think that could have been a separate comment on society at the time, because obviously, like we said, at the point of this film being made, it was probably taboo at the time to have homosexual desires.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we don't understand Japanese culture fully. As
No.
we probably made some mistakes somewhere in this video.
I mean, this is all just speculation from our point.
Especially in like the 1980s, 90s,
80s leading into the 90s. Mm-hmm. We obviously don't know. We weren't even born around that time.
Exactly.
So we can't say for sure, but this is just us speculating, I guess.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, that's the main thing I get from this movie is the technology taking over the societal commentary of the salaryman working to the bone without worrying about his own mental health. And then, like, the homosexual commentary. Those are the three main things I get from this movie when I try and find a message, I guess.
Yeah.
Through all the chaos and, like, anxiety. If you dive past that, you kind of see some of these messages going on.
Definitely.
But do you have anything more to say about this movie before we go on to the Darwin Awards?
Not a whole lot. I'd love to move on to the Darwin Awards, see
Sure.
what we have planned.
All right. We only have 2 nominees for this ceremony because, well, there's just not a whole lot of characters to choose from, let's be honest. Do you want to start with the first nominee?
Let's start with the first nominee. First nominee we're going to say is the salary man.
Yep.
We're trying to hide his body transformations or growths from his girlfriend when clearly she was going to find out. Because it's pretty hard to hide a fucking drill cock.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you pretty much summed it up. There's not much else to say. You can't hide when your whole fucking body's metal. At this point, it wasn't entirely metal. It started out with just his arm, a little bit on his face. He put a bandage on and put some a bandage around his arm, and I think it was his ankle maybe. Started out there, but then as soon as he's got his drill cock and bunch of his body, you can't hide that. He's like, I don't know why he even tries. So, dumb move on his part.
Continue.
Second nominee, got the salaryman's girlfriend. So, her boyfriend, the salaryman, eventually tries to have sex with her with the drill penis, like we talked about before. She stabs him in the throat, causing him to presumably die. I mean, good move on her part, right?
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, he doesn't die. Once he regains consciousness, probably from the metal healing him, I don't know, he wakes up to find his girlfriend dead and riding his drill cock. So she killed herself trying to have sex with him and riding that thing. I mean, pretty dumb move if you ask me. You already had stabbed him and had time to get out of there and not die, but decide to jump on a giant drill penis.
So who do you think should win? And then I'll save my argument, and then we'll argue against each other.
I mean, they're both pretty dumb. And you could argue with the salaryman's girlfriend, like we said before, how she may not want to live anymore because she loved this guy, but he couldn't satisfy her anymore, so there was no reason to live, or whatever. You could write it off in a couple different ways. And then the salaryman trying to hide his body transformations. Again, you could understand why he's trying to, because he's ashamed of it and doesn't want to show the one he loves this, I don't know what the fuck you call it, this problem that he has. It's a pretty big problem. And you could understand why he's doing it, but at face value, it's pretty fucking stupid because you're not going to be able to hide it. So, it could go either way for me. I wouldn't be mad either way, but I'll give the edge to the salaryman.
I'm also going to give the edge to the salaryman for the main purpose that it sounds like a Three's Company episode. It's just like guy tries to hide thing and is like overly comical about it. So salaryman wins Darwin Award, I guess.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah,
I'll accept that.
Yeah. Okay. Ratings for this movie.
Overall ratings. I'll let you go first.
Yeah.
You kind of already touched on yours, so.
So overall rating for this movie 6.5.
Out of 10?
Out of 10. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep. I did not enjoy this movie all that much, but I love the elements that went into it, such as the soundtrack, the stop motion, the body horror.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much love that went into this movie where I could see 100% how people say it's quote-unquote groundbreaking.
Yeah.
But I didn't like it. I loved it more than the Blair Witch for something if you want to call low budget, like, because I can see like the elements that went into it and why people would be like, yeah, this is a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I thought of.
Yeah, fair enough. Mm-hmm. And I get your points for sure. And I mean, everybody has their own opinions on how they feel about these kind of movies, because I think the anxiety-inducing aspect of it is, it's either you like it or you hate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not a fan of the way that it makes you feel, you're not going to like this movie for sure.
Yeah.
And so my rating out of 10 is 7.5. I enjoyed it. I do think it's a tough watch, and I think you need to be in the right mood for it and kind of know what to expect going into it. Like, you got to know that you're going in.
It's not one of those movies that you want to go into blind, almost.
Yeah, like, you kind of want to know that you're going to be in for an anxiety trip.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's a tough watch. But if that's something you kind of long for, like,
strive with,
you kind of want to feel, because maybe you don't feel it in real life, you want a movie to try and get you there.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is for me, because I don't really have anxiety attacks and I don't know what it's like. And I always like feeling something I haven't felt
But you
before.
almost know what it's like to want to turn a horror movie off.
Yeah.
And not because it's bad, because it just makes you feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I like seeing in movies. I like seeing a movie that makes me feel something that I don't typically get to feel in every day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Which is why I enjoyed this movie and why I recommend you watch it. And on the side note, it was actually listed on Steven Schneider's list of 1,001 movies you must see before you die. And I agree with it. I think this is a movie you should watch before you die. Not going back and watching it every year or anything, or watching it, maybe even watch it once in your life. But for a movie to be so effective at causing anxiety or like the sensory overload we talk about in the way that this film does, I think it's unique and definitely an experience that I think is necessary to partake in at least once.
It's an experience, but I'm not quite sure if I agree.
That's fair.
Like,
this is to each their own.
It's teach your own. Like, I can see why it's effective in that sense. Mm-hmm. However, I wanted to move on to another surprise segment that I don't think you were quite expecting.
The Einstein Award?
Nope.
Oh.
It's another experience that I think we're going to move on to, and it's called the... How do you feel about this movie as a body horror movie? How do you feel about this movie's body horror?
Like in terms
out of 10.
Compared to other body horror movies?
Out of 10, yeah.
So, I mean, this isn't number one for body horror for me.
Out of other horror movies, I guess. Horror movies, body horror, whatever you want to compare it to.
How do I rank it as a body horror film, or how do I rank it as a
horror
film?
Out of 10. Out of 10, how do you rank it as
specifically body
horror?
horror?
Yep.
Out of 10 for body horror,
yep.
I'd probably say 6.5.
6.5 for body horror.
It's not that the body horror is not that disturbing for me.
Yeah.
And compared to other things like Martyrs disturbs me because of the body horror.
Oh, I love Martyrs.
Yeah, Martyrs is great.
Is full 10/10.
Yeah, 10 out of 10 probably for me too. The Fly body horror I like way more than this body horror.
I still saw the stop motion and all that, and like at that point I'd rate it 8.5.
For body horror?
Yeah, I thought of this segment like halfway through the podcast here. Okay. But like 8.5, like I feel like the way that it's done is very tasteful. And I think it's really good in that aspect. So if you like body horror...
Oh, it's definitely effective.
I think you love this movie, for sure.
And, I mean, body horror is one of my favorite subgenres of horror because it makes me feel something so strongly. Yeah. Where most horror, I kind of like, I'm entertained by it, but I'm not disturbed by it. You know what I mean?
I think it really depends. So for like Saw, I love Saw. Saw is probably one of my favorite movie franchises just because I love mutilation as bad as that sounds.
No, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you love, like, you know it's not real.
Yeah.
But you love to see. I guess
you love to see the inner workings of the human body.
Well, you want to see
in an aspect like that.
Yeah, and you want to be shocked.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the same with me. I want to be shocked. I want to be disturbed. And if a movie can do that for me, it's great. I love it.
With that being said, we hope you enjoyed this episode on Tetsuo the Iron Man. Join us next time on our channel. Subscribe, comment, anything. Anyways, with all that being said, this is us saying
Cheers to fears.